They told me I was too old, too broken, too far gone to love again. They said the best years of my life were behind me, that I was meant to fade quietly into the background. But what they didn't understand was the fire inside me that refused to be extinguished. At 78, I found love again. Not just any love, but a love that came after years of loneliness, heartache, and sacrifice. It wasn't easy, it wasn't perfect, but I fought for it. I fought for me. And in the end, I had the most powerful wedding of my life. This is the story of reclaiming your worth, of rising from the ashes, and finding a love that the world said I was too old to deserve. It's hard to describe the moment you realize that your life isn't over, especially when the world around you has already written you off. By the time I reached my 70s, I had been told countless times that I had seen my best years. People often looked at me with pity, as if the very idea of starting over at my age was an absurdity. But what they didn't know was that deep inside, I still had dreams. Dreams of joy, of adventure, of love. And in the most unexpected of ways, love found me again when I least expected it. I had been married before, for more than 35 years, to a man I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. We had shared so many memories, raised children, traveled, and built a life together. But as with many long marriages, things changed. We drifted apart. And when he passed away, I was left to navigate life alone, wondering if I would ever experience companionship again. The world had always told me that as I aged, my beauty, my worth, my potential, all diminished. I was a widow, a grandmother, but I never saw myself as just those labels. There was still a woman inside me who longed for connection. I had my family and friends, of course, but there was a piece missing, someone to share my days with. But at 78, I thought it was a long shot. After all, who would want to marry someone my age? Society had so many expectations about how life should unfold, and romance after 70 wasn't exactly at the top of the list. I remember one day, while chatting with a close friend over tea, the conversation turned to love and marriage. She chuckled when I mentioned that maybe I'd consider dating again. "You're too old for that," she said, not unkindly, but with a gentle assumption that I had no more interest in that side of life. "Maybe just enjoy the memories of your first marriage." That stung, but it also lit a fire inside of me. Who said I couldn't have another shot at happiness? The idea seemed almost ridiculous at first. I wasn't a young woman anymore, nor did I look the same. My body had aged, my hair had turned silver, and my energy levels had certainly changed. But deep down, I knew that love didn't have an age limit. It wasn't about looks or youth. It was about connection. It was about finding someone who saw you, really saw you, for all you are, at every stage of your life. It started small, like most things do. I signed up for an online dating site, though I wasn't sure what to expect. My profile was simple: a picture of me in a sun hat, smiling wide at a family barbecue with a caption that said, "Looking for new adventures, new stories, and new love." I was honest about my age, 78, and about my experiences, but also about what I still desired: companionship, shared laughter, love. When I first clicked search, I was overwhelmed by the options. There were men out there looking for everything from casual conversations to serious relationships, but many of them were much younger, and I wasn't sure if I could connect with them. But I found a few who seemed interesting. Men who weren't looking for someone to take care of them, but someone to walk alongside them in life. One profile stood out. His name was Thomas. He was a widower like me, in his early 80s, and his photos showed him standing on a hiking trail with a hiking stick in hand, a content smile on his face. His caption read, Life is for the living. If you still have the fire, don't let anyone tell you to put it out. Something about his words resonated with me. This was the kind of man I was looking for. Someone who refused to let age define him. Someone who still had adventure in his soul. We exchanged messages for weeks, learning about each other's lives, our joys, our losses, and our dreams. Thomas had lived an interesting life. He had been a journalist, a traveler, and a lover of the arts. But most importantly, he was kind. His messages weren't just about his achievements. They were about his curiosity, his gratitude for the little things, and his appreciation for the richness of life. It was clear that he wasn't focused on finding a partner simply to fill a void. He wanted a companion to share his journey with. Finally, after weeks of messages, we agreed to meet. I won't lie, I was nervous. What if he didn't like me? What if he expected something I couldn't give? But when we met at a quiet cafe, all those worries melted away. There was something so familiar about him, something warm and easy. We spoke for hours, about everything and nothing. It felt as if we had known each other for years. Over the following months, we continued to spend time together. We shared meals, went on walks, and explored places I had never visited before. There were no grand gestures, no overwhelming passions like I had felt in my youth. But what I had with Thomas was different. It was steady, it was grounded, and it was real. It wasn't long before we started talking about marriage. It wasn't something I had expected, especially at this stage of life. But Thomas had a way of making me believe that it was possible. "I don't need much," he told me one evening. "I don't need to start over, but I would like to start this chapter with you." And so, we decided to get married. As the decision to marry Thomas began to settle in, I started to realize how deeply ingrained society's expectations were in my mind. I had been living my life under the assumption that marriage at my age was something only to be remembered, not something to pursue again. But the idea of being with someone who truly understood me, who saw me as a woman, not a grandmother, not a widow, but simply a person, felt so right. I remember telling my children about Thomas. They were happy for me, of course, but there was that underlying uncertainty, the kind you can feel even in the most well-meaning comments. "Mum, are you sure? You've been alone for so long. Isn't it too late to be starting something new?" They meant well, but those words stung. They weren't being unkind, but they were projecting their own fears about aging and the assumptions that come with it. I could feel the weight of their concern, and it made me question myself for just a moment. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was strange for someone my age to embark on something as significant as marriage again. Maybe people were right when they said I was too old for a wedding. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I wanted this. I didn't want to give in to the societal narrative that once you reached a certain age, your life was meant to be quiet and uneventful. That kind of thinking was not for me. I wasn't ready to fade into the background. I had already lived through one marriage, one life, and I had seen all the twists and turns that life could throw at me. Now, I wanted to see what was left, to be bold and live fully in this next chapter, with someone who made me feel alive. It wasn't about starting over or erasing the past. I didn't want to forget the life I had built with my late husband, or the memories we had shared. But I had also realized that love wasn't something that could be contained in one chapter of my life. It was something that could continue to unfold in new and beautiful ways, no matter your age. The idea of a wedding felt surreal, to be honest. In my mind, weddings had always been for the young. They were grand affairs filled with excitement and hope for the future. But I soon realized that a wedding didn't need to be a reflection of youth. It could be a celebration of what I had learned, what I had overcome, and what I had come to appreciate in life. My wedding wouldn't be about fitting into some mold of what others expected it to be. It would be about me and Thomas, and the life we were about to begin together. When Thomas and I started discussing the details of our wedding, it was clear we didn't want anything traditional. Neither of us had a need for an extravagant event. We wanted something simple, yet meaningful. We didn't want to spend thousands on a big reception, or feel the pressure of conforming to societal norms about what a wedding should look like. I wasn't going to put on a white gown, nor did I feel the need to hire an expensive wedding planner. Instead, we chose to marry in a small, intimate ceremony that felt more like a celebration of us than an obligation to others. We decided to have the wedding at the local botanical garden. I had always loved nature, and it seemed like the perfect place to begin this new chapter of my life. There was something peaceful and refreshing about being surrounded by trees, flowers, and the gentle rustling of leaves. It felt like a metaphor for our relationship, a natural, quiet, and steady growth that didn't demand attention but was beautiful in its own right. Planning the wedding was an adventure in itself. The first thing I did was call my best friend, who had been my confidant through all the years, to ask for help. She was thrilled at the idea and immediately jumped in to help with the details. We agreed on a small guest list, just family and close friends. I didn't want to invite people out of obligation. I wanted only those who truly meant something to me to witness this moment. We ordered a small wedding cake from a local bakery, something simple and elegant, and decided to forgo the lavish decorations in favor of letting the natural beauty of the venue shine through. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much this wedding was about breaking free from expectations. No one thought I would be getting married again at my age. It wasn't even something they could fathom. But in the act of choosing to marry again, I was defying that very expectation. I was showing myself, and anyone else who might feel that their best years are behind them, that it is never too late to love, to commit, and to start something new. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with joy and nerves. I didn't care about the little things, the seating arrangements, the bouquet, or the fancy invitations. What mattered was that I was marrying a man who respected me, loved me, and wanted to build something real together. I wasn't concerned with how others would view my wedding. I didn't need approval or validation from anyone. This day was about me, Thomas, and the life we were beginning together. And so, when the day finally arrived, I was calm. I had no expectations for perfection, only for the celebration of the love that had found its way into my life at a time when I thought it had long passed me by. I was ready to walk down the aisle, not as a widow or a grandmother, but as a woman who had lived, loved, and learned, and was now opening the door to the next beautiful chapter of her life. The morning of our wedding, I woke up earlier than I had planned, as if my body had instinctively known that today was not just another day, it was the beginning of something significant. The sun was already casting a golden glow over the small apartment I had called home for the past few years. My reflection in the mirror seemed unfamiliar, yet comforting. There I was, 78 years old, grey hair gently tousled, and yet I felt more radiant than I ever had. I wasn't a young bride, and that was okay. I had earned every line on my face, every silver strand in my hair, and every wrinkle that marked a lifetime of laughter and sorrow. And today, I would wear all of that proudly. As I prepared for the ceremony, I took a moment to reflect on the journey that had led me to this point. How many times had I been told that my life, particularly my romantic life, was over? How many times had I been made to feel invisible simply because of my age? Yet here I was, preparing to marry a man who saw me, not as someone to be dismissed or pitied, but as someone worthy of love and partnership. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I wasn't just thankful for Thomas. I was thankful for myself. I had walked through life with strength, and now I was about to step into this new chapter with love. The day's events unfolded slowly, peacefully. There was no rush, no chaos, just a calmness that seemed to settle over everything. I wore a simple but elegant dress. Nothing too fancy, just something that made me feel like myself. It wasn't the white gown I had worn decades ago, but it was perfect for the woman I had become. It hugged my body gently, and the soft lace felt like a reminder of the beauty that comes with age. I had decided not to have a professional photographer. Instead, my best friend took the pictures that captured the moments as they were, not as some curated version of perfection. They weren't about getting the perfect shot or following the trends. They were about us, Thomas and me, in our truth. The wedding wasn't about showcasing to the world. It was about honoring this deep connection we had found. It was raw and honest and real, and that's what made it so beautiful. The ceremony was held at the Botanical Garden, just as we had planned. It wasn't large or extravagant. There were no extravagant flowers, no long aisles with hundreds of chairs. Instead, we had an intimate gathering of family and friends who had all gathered to witness this moment that was as unique as the two of us. We exchanged our vows under the shade of a beautiful oak tree, its branches reaching out like arms ready to embrace our union. When Thomas said his vows to me, I could feel his sincerity in every word. He spoke of the years we had ahead of us and how grateful he was to have found me. I had always been afraid that I would never be able to love again the way I had loved my late husband. But here was Thomas, who made me believe that love wasn't a limited resource. There was enough room for new love, a love that wasn't bound by time or the past, but built on the shared understanding of two people who had lived through much and were now ready to create new memories together. When it was my turn, I felt the weight of my own words. I didn't just speak from the heart. I spoke from a lifetime of experiences. I had lived through loss, joy, confusion, and discovery. I had faced the fears of being alone in my later years. But in Thomas, I had found someone who understood that every moment was precious, no matter how old you were. As I looked into his eyes, I knew that he wasn't just there for me. He was there with me, in the present, willing to move forward with all the beautiful uncertainty that life had to offer. I vow to keep choosing you, every day, no matter what life brings us, I said, my voice steady. I vow to love you, not because I have to, but because I want to. I want to see every day as an opportunity to grow, to laugh, to love, and to share every moment with you. It wasn't a perfect speech. My voice wavered, and a tear or two slipped down my cheek, but it was honest, and it was true. And when I finished, Thomas took my hands and held them in his with a look that said everything. He didn't need to speak. His eyes told me that he felt the same way. It was in that moment, as we exchanged rings, that I realized how much I had been wrong to doubt myself, to question whether I deserved this. I wasn't too old. I wasn't too late. I was exactly where I needed to be. The ceremony was followed by a quiet reception in a small part of the garden. We didn't need a grand ballroom or an expensive caterer. We simply shared a meal with those who mattered most. My family and friends, some of whom had been with me through my darkest times, were there to celebrate this beautiful moment with us. It wasn't about showing off or pretending to be something we weren't. It was about sharing love and creating new memories. As I stood there, watching Thomas and the people I loved most in the world, I realized something. This was my best wedding, not because of the flowers or the dress, but because it was real. It wasn't based on expectations or some fairy tale idea of what a wedding should be. It was based on truth, on the recognition that love doesn't fade with age. it evolves. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that I had fought for, one that I had worked for. It was a love born not out of youthful passion, but of understanding, respect, and mutual care. It wasn't too late for me, and it wasn't too late for anyone else who believed that love, in whatever form it comes, is always worth pursuing. The morning after the wedding, I woke up next to Thomas, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. There was no rush to get up or to check off the things on the to-do list that always seemed to loom over me. No frantic phone calls, no expectations to meet. Just a simple quiet, the kind that you only get when you know that everything is exactly as it should be. I looked at him, still asleep, and I smiled. He looked like a man who had been living for years with a great big weight on his shoulders and had finally put it down. His face, soft in sleep, reminded me of the man I had come to love, someone who had experienced so much in his life, just as I had. But there was an ease in him now that I had not seen before. We had crossed over into something new, something that no one thought we could have. We weren't just two people who had found each other. We were two people who had found a future together when the world expected us to settle for less. I stayed there for a moment, simply breathing in the calmness of the morning. The reality of it all started to sink in. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. This wasn't some perfect moment captured in a movie. It was real life, a real love, grounded in the understanding that we were both past the point of pretending. There were no illusions between us. We didn't need to be anything other than who we were in that moment. As I got up and made my way to the kitchen to prepare coffee, I couldn't help but think about how many people would have scoffed at the idea of someone my age getting married again. There were still plenty of people out there who thought it was ridiculous, who thought that after a certain age, relationships should just be about companionship, not love. As if love had an expiration date, but I knew better. I had spent enough years living in the shadows of others' expectations to understand that love doesn't have a set timeline. There is no universal right time for love, and it doesn't follow the pattern that society tells you it should. I wasn't a young bride, but in many ways, I was the most alive I had ever been. As Thomas wandered into the kitchen, he wrapped his arms around me from behind, planting a kiss on my cheek. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," he said, his voice thick with sleep, but filled with affection. I laughed softly, the words still unfamiliar, but in the best possible way. "Good morning, Mr. Walker," I replied, turning to face him. "Can you believe we did it? I never thought I'd be doing this again." He smiled, his eyes lighting up with a warmth I couldn't quite explain. "I can't believe how perfect everything turned out. It feels right, doesn't it?" "It does," I said, feeling a rush of gratitude flood my chest. I had never realized how much I longed for this quiet morning, this connection, this second chance. I had spent so many years living for others, always putting my needs aside, always assuming that my life had reached its peak. But I was learning that it wasn't about what the world told me was appropriate. It was about what felt true to me, what made me feel whole. Over breakfast, we didn't talk much about the wedding. We didn't need to. It was already in the past, an event that had come and gone, leaving behind only the quiet joy of a new commitment. Instead, we talked about the future. We discussed the little things, the trips we'd like to take, the books we wanted to read, the places we hoped to visit, and even the simple joys we wanted to savor as we grew older together. It was comforting, grounding. For the first time in years, I felt like I was looking forward to something with excitement, not anxiety. But then, as the morning unfolded, the thoughts started creeping in, the ones that always followed me, even when I tried to push them away. What would people think now? How would they view our marriage, given our age? I had always felt the weight of others' opinions, especially in my later years. People love to tell you what you should be doing, what your life should look like, and when you should give up on things like love and marriage. There are societal expectations that put so much pressure on individuals, particularly older adults, to stop pursuing their desires or dreams, as if those desires fade with age. But they don't. They simply evolve. I had spent too long believing that those societal expectations defined me, that I had to abide by the unwritten rulebook of aging. But now, I realized that those expectations were nothing more than that. Expectations. And I was free to write my own story, to step outside of that box. I wasn't bound by age or appearance or anyone's opinion but my own. I knew that, despite the joy we felt, there would be people who would have their doubts, people who would gossip behind our backs, who might find it laughable that we had chosen to marry so late in life. But that didn't matter anymore. I didn't need their approval. Thomas and I had found something real, and that was all that mattered. Later that afternoon, we took a quiet walk through the garden where we had been married. The same trees, the same flowers, but somehow everything felt different now. The air smelled sweeter, the colors more vibrant. I think it was because the place held so much meaning for us now, a symbol of the love we had discovered at an age when most people assumed love was no longer possible. As we strolled side by side, hand in hand, I realized that this wasn't just a new beginning for us as a couple. It was a new beginning for me, personally. I had spent so many years convinced that I had already lived my most significant moments. But here I was, in my late 70s, having one of the happiest moments of my life. And in that, I realized how much more I had to live, how many more beautiful moments awaited me. Thomas leaned in close and whispered, "I'm so glad I found you. It feels like we've been waiting for each other all this time." I smiled, my heart swelling. Me too. And I'm so glad I didn't listen to anyone who said it was too late. We walked on, knowing that the journey ahead was not about fitting into the boxes society had created, but about making our own path. Together. In the days following our wedding, life took on a new rhythm. It wasn't the kind of dramatic shift you might expect after such a momentous event. There were no grandiose changes or sweeping transformations. But what I came to realize was that it was in the quiet beauty of the everyday that our marriage truly began to bloom. The little moments, the shared smiles, the gentle touch of Thomas's hand in mine as we went about our daily lives. Those were the things that mattered. There were no huge expectations to meet anymore. There were no societal pressures to perform or be anything other than ourselves. The days no longer felt like a blur of appointments and obligations. Instead, they were filled with quiet contentment, the kind that comes from simply being with someone who understands you, who doesn't want you to be anything other than who you are, in that very moment. We settled into a new routine. Every morning, we made coffee together. Thomas with his preferred dark roast, me with a lighter brew. We would sit at the kitchen table, reading the newspaper, talking about the weather, or discussing the books we were currently reading. Nothing fancy. But it was in those simple moments that I found the joy I had longed for. After decades of caring for others, raising children, being a wife, a daughter, and a mother, it felt incredibly fulfilling to focus on something as small as sharing a cup of coffee without the weight of any expectations hanging over me. I found myself learning to enjoy the stillness. The world outside was always in motion, always bustling, always rushing. But in my home, with Thomas by my side, I had created a space where time didn't seem to matter as much. It wasn't about having a packed schedule, or constantly being busy. It was about being present, about finding contentment in the now. And that, I realized, was something I had never truly given myself permission to do before. One of the things I most appreciated about Thomas was how easy he made it to simply be. There were no dramatic displays of affection, no grand gestures that were meant to impress anyone. Instead, his love was shown in the way he asked about my day, in the way he listened when I spoke, and in the way he gave me space to be myself, without ever questioning or doubting me. I had spent so many years seeking validation from the outside world that I had forgotten how to just be with someone. But with him, I didn't need to prove anything. I was enough just as I was. There were moments when I would catch myself looking at him, marveling at how it all worked out. How, after so many years of living alone, after all the heartache and struggle, I had found someone who truly saw me. Someone who didn't care about my age, about what society thought I should or shouldn't be doing. He simply saw a woman who had lived, loved, and who still had so much to offer. And in his eyes, I saw myself in a way I hadn't in years. Seen, appreciated, and loved. But it wasn't just about Thomas. It was about me too. I had rediscovered parts of myself that I had long buried under the weight of life's expectations. When you're young, you're always taught that love is about passion, about finding someone who sweeps you off your feet. But when you're older, you begin to realize that love isn't about those fleeting moments. It's about the quiet ones, the ones that happen when you're not looking for them. It's the companionship that grows over time, the support that's offered without question, the knowing glances and gentle touches that say more than words ever could. Our love didn't feel like a whirlwind. It didn't feel like a storybook romance, but it was real, and it was enough. I realized that love in my 70s didn't have to be a reflection of what I had experienced in my youth. It didn't need to fit any mold. It was its own beautiful thing, full of understanding, respect, and mutual care. Our days were also filled with simple joys. Something as small as taking a walk together around the neighborhood, or watching a favorite movie at home. There were no big trips planned yet, no expensive vacations. It wasn't about keeping up with anyone or trying to impress anyone. It was about us, our life together. And that was enough. I took more time to slow down and really appreciate the small things, the rustling of the trees in the park, the taste of a meal cooked with love, the warmth of the sun on my face during a leisurely afternoon walk. For so long, I had lived my life in a rush. There was always something to do, someone to care for, someone to please. But now, in this new chapter, I gave myself permission to simply be. I didn't have to do everything. I didn't have to be everything. I just had to show up and live, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living for me. Even as I basked in the quiet joy of my marriage to Thomas, I couldn't ignore the unspoken judgments that lingered just beneath the surface of society. It wasn't always outright criticism, but there were moments, small comments, sideways glances, that made it clear that many people still saw our relationship as unusual. It was as if, by simply choosing to love again, we were defying some unspoken rule about aging. One afternoon, as Thomas and I were walking through the park, we ran into a woman I had known for years. She was one of those acquaintances who had always had an opinion on everything, and as soon as she saw us, she raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know you two were still, well, together," she said, her voice dripping with a sort of disbelief. I smiled politely, but the comment stung. It was that dismissive tone that had become so familiar to me, the idea that our love, our marriage, was somehow odd. "It's not like we're starting a family or anything," I replied lightly, trying to brush off the comment, but in my heart, I felt the weight of it. Thomas, ever the calm one, simply nodded. We're happy, and that's all that matters. But it was never just about what others thought. It was also the way I had internalized those judgments over the years. Even now, when I looked in the mirror, I still had to remind myself that my happiness wasn't dependent on others' approval. The world had conditioned me, especially in my older years, to believe that love, marriage, and new beginnings were for the young, as if there was a point where it all simply stopped. But now, standing in this new life with Thomas, I knew better. Yet it wasn't always easy to silence those voices, whether from others or from within myself. It was a struggle to constantly remind myself that my happiness didn't have to follow some script that others wrote for me. I had to learn to let go of that need for external validation, to stop letting the expectations of others dictate how I lived my life. Thomas and I continued to navigate those small, uncomfortable moments. But we did it together. Every time someone made an offhand comment or looked at us strangely, we found strength in each other. We didn't need to explain ourselves to anyone. We had found something that was ours, something beautiful, something worth fighting for. And in the quiet moments we shared, we both knew that love wasn't confined to youth, and it certainly wasn't defined by age. The more I lived this new life with Thomas, the more I realized how much of my past had been shaped by the expectations of others. From the moment I married my first husband, I had been expected to follow certain rules, to be a dutiful wife, a mother who always put her children first, a woman who adhered to societal expectations of what a woman should be. There were unspoken guidelines for how I was supposed to live, how I was supposed to love, and how I was supposed to age. But when I met Thomas, all of that began to unravel. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could redefine who I was, how I loved, and how I chose to live. There were no more obligations to anyone except myself and Thomas. There was no longer a need to live up to the standards set by society. I could do whatever I wanted, in whatever way felt right for me. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the sunset, Thomas turned to me and said, "You know, it's strange. In so many ways, I feel like we're just beginning." He smiled, and I could see the contentment in his eyes. "I feel the same way," I said, leaning back in my chair, my eyes tracing the fading light of the sky. "I think the world is always telling us that things end at certain points, that once you've reached a certain age, there are no more new chapters. But you and we're proving that wrong, aren't we?" Thomas laughed softly, his gaze softening. "I guess we are. And it feels damn good, doesn't it?" It did feel good. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, the weight of others' expectations, the weight of a life lived by someone else's rules. Now I was free. Free to live for myself. Free to love in a way that didn't have to fit into a box. Free to choose my own path, at whatever age I wanted. And for the first time, I realized that the freedom to be who I truly was, without apology, was the greatest gift I could give myself. I didn't need a grand celebration to prove that I was alive. I didn't need to perform for anyone. What I had now, this quiet life with Thomas, our love, our shared understanding, was everything I had ever wanted. The world may have tried to tell me that it was too late for me to find this, but they were wrong. This was my time, and it had come when I least expected it. As we continued to sit in silence, watching the world change around us, I thought about everything I had been through, the struggles, the heartache, the doubts. But I also thought about the freedom I had found. I no longer feared what people thought of me. I no longer feared that love had passed me by. I was living proof that it wasn't too late for anything. Thomas squeezed my hand gently, as if he knew exactly what was running through my mind. And in that moment, I realized that love, true love, isn't bound by age. It's bound by the connection between two people who are willing to throw away the rulebook and live on their own terms. And for that, I was more grateful than words could ever express. As the weeks went by, Thomas and I settled into a comfortable routine. But there were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling of being haunted by my past. It wasn't about Thomas. He was everything I had hoped for in a partner and more, but about the years I had spent with my first husband. Even though we had shared so many good years together, there was always a lingering sense of loss, the kind you feel when a chapter of your life ends. And even though I had closed that chapter, I had never fully allowed myself to mourn it. One afternoon, while Thomas was out running errands, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I went into the attic of the house, where I had stored the boxes filled with old photographs and mementos from my previous life. As I pulled out the first box and began sifting through old pictures, memories of my first marriage came rushing back. Some were happy memories, the family vacations, the milestones, the birthdays. Others were tinged with sorrow, the arguments we never resolved, the moments of misunderstanding that had quietly eaten away at our connection. I sat there for a long time, holding photos of my children when they were small, of our family at holidays, and of my ex-husband and me smiling at a wedding reception, young and full of hope. I realized how much time I had spent trying to hold on to those moments, trying to preserve a version of myself that no longer existed. It was easy to get lost in the nostalgia of it all, to remember the love that once was. But then, I caught myself. Those memories weren't my present anymore. They were just part of a past that had shaped who I had become, but no longer defined me. I slowly started sorting through the photos, letting go of the ones that no longer served me. I wasn't erasing the past. I would never forget the good times we shared, the family we had built. But I was choosing to release the pain. I was freeing myself from the weight of old memories that held me back from fully embracing the present. As I placed the photos back into the box and headed back downstairs, I felt lighter. It wasn't that I was letting go of my past completely, but I was making room for my new life. My marriage to Thomas wasn't about replacing the past, it was about moving forward. I had been carrying the weight of my previous life for so long that I hadn't realized how much space it had taken up in my heart. By allowing myself to face those memories, I had made peace with them. And now, I was ready to live in the present. When Thomas came home, I was waiting for him, a soft smile on my face. I didn't need to say anything. He could tell something had shifted in me. I had faced a piece of my past, and I was finally ready to leave it behind and step into the future with him. As time passed, I began to see the subtle, yet powerful shifts that came with embracing a new beginning at 78. The changes weren't always visible to others, but to me, they were everything. I had spent so many years adhering to others' expectations, sacrificing parts of myself to fit into roles I didn't always want to play. Now, with Thomas by my side, I had the space to become the person I had always been meant to be. There was a new energy in our home. The simple acts of daily life, once filled with routine, now felt special. I found myself cooking meals with a sense of joy I hadn't felt in years. Cooking had always been a part of my life, but it had often felt like just another task, something to check off the list. But now, every meal we shared felt like a small celebration. I took the time to make dishes we both enjoyed, experimenting with new recipes, and even cooking together on weekends. It was in these moments, in the quiet of our kitchen, that I realized how much joy I had been missing by not allowing myself to fully enjoy the present. We also began planning small trips together, exploring places we had always wanted to visit, but never had the chance to. We didn't need grand vacations or expensive getaways. We found joy in the little things, walking through art galleries, taking short drives to nearby towns, visiting farmers' markets, and simply being in each other's company. We didn't need to impress anyone. All we needed was each other. One weekend, we decided to take a trip to the coast. The weather was perfect, sunny, with just the right amount of breeze. We walked along the beach, our feet sinking into the warm sand, and talked about everything and nothing. I remember that moment so clearly, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore, the seagulls soaring above us, the way the light from the setting sun bathed everything in a golden glow. It felt timeless. We weren't bound by expectations, and we didn't need to be anything other than the people we were in that moment. On that trip, I also realized that I no longer worried about what others thought of me. I didn't care if people stared or judged us for being older and still in love. I didn't care if they whispered about us or wondered how we could possibly be starting over at our age. All that mattered was that I had found a love that felt real, a love that wasn't based on age or appearance, or what society thought was appropriate. I was free to love without limitations. At 78, I had learned that new beginnings weren't reserved for the young. They weren't dependent on some arbitrary age limit or a set of rules that told you when you were done with life. I had found a second chance at love, not because it was expected, but because it was possible. And that possibility was enough. We spent the rest of that day walking hand in hand, simply soaking in the beauty of the world around us. We had no agenda, no deadline, just the quiet pleasure of being together in a place we had never been before, experiencing life as we had always hoped to. In those moments, I realized that this was the life I had always wanted. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and I was finally living it. As the months passed, I found that my life with Thomas wasn't just about embracing new experiences, but also about learning the quiet art of letting go. It was about releasing the old baggage, memories of lost love, moments of regret, and all the what-ifs that had clung to me like a shadow. For so long, I had carried that weight, believing that it was somehow a part of me. But with each passing day, I realized that those burdens didn't belong in my present life. They had already shaped me, and now it was time to release them. The act of letting go wasn't easy. There were days when the memories of my first marriage, both the good and the bad, came rushing back. There were moments when I found myself grieving the version of myself that had once been so full of hope, so certain about what the future would hold. I missed the woman I had been before life had broken me down in some ways. But even as those feelings came, I realized that they didn't have to define me anymore. I didn't need to cling to them as if they were the last vestiges of who I was. I remember one afternoon when I was going through an old box of keepsakes, letters, cards, and little mementos from my first marriage. I had kept them all, preserving pieces of a time that had come and gone. As I held a card that my late husband had written for our anniversary, I felt a pang of nostalgia. But then, as I read his words, I also realized how much I had changed since those days, how much I had grown, not just as a wife, but as a woman who had found strength in herself after losing so much. That moment of clarity was powerful. I could love those memories for what they had been, but I didn't need to carry them around as if they were still my present reality. I could choose to let go, to create space for new memories with Thomas, for new experiences that didn't have to be overshadowed by the past. Thomas, always perceptive to my emotional shifts, sensed that something had changed. One evening, as we sat on the couch, I shared my thoughts with him. I told him about the box of mementos, about how I had come to the realization that I was ready to move forward, to embrace this new life fully. "You've always been so patient with me." I said softly. I don't think I've ever really let go of the past until now. And it's not that I want to forget it. I just want to make room for what we have. Thomas reached for my hand, his grip warm and steady. I've always known you were strong, he said. And now you're free to be the woman you've always been meant to be. I'm just lucky enough to be here with you. Those words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years being weighed down by things I couldn't change, by regrets and past mistakes. But now, with Thomas, I realized that the past didn't need to hold me captive. It didn't need to dictate how I lived my life today. The power of letting go had given me the freedom to embrace the woman I was becoming. And I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. As I began to let go of the past, I also realized that I was ready to build a new future. A future that wasn't dictated by the expectations of others, by the timelines they thought I should follow, or by the roles I had once been forced to fit into. This was my time, and with Thomas, we could build something entirely new. We started small, as most people do when they're building a life together. We moved forward without fanfare. No grand declarations, no major life shifts. Just small steps toward a future we were creating together. It felt more natural than I could have ever imagined. There was no pressure, no rushing. Just two people who had found each other late in life and were taking it day by day. We decided to move into a new house. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it was ours. A little cottage on the outskirts of town, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood with a garden that begged to be cultivated. I wanted a space that felt like home, one where we could grow, laugh, and create the kind of memories that would fill the years ahead. The move was a fresh start, a physical manifestation of the new life we were building. We spent days cleaning, painting, and decorating the house, but most importantly, we spent time making it our own. We found joy in picking out furniture together, in choosing the color of the curtains, and in planting flowers in the front yard. We even got a dog, a golden retriever named Charlie, who quickly became the heart of our little home. I began to see how much these small moments mattered. It wasn't the big, life-altering decisions that defined us, but the small, everyday things we did together. The way we laughed at each other's jokes, the way we shared a cup of coffee in the morning, the way we made decisions together. Those were the things that built the foundation of our life. And, with each passing day, I felt more connected to Thomas. We took trips together, yes. We visited places we'd always wanted to see, even if it was just a weekend getaway to a nearby town. But I realized that it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey we were on together, hand in hand, with no particular destination in mind. What mattered was the way we supported each other, the way we cared for each other, and the way we shared in each other's dreams and hopes. And so, life continued. Slowly but surely, we were building the kind of life I had once thought impossible. A life that wasn't about age or expectations or the past. It was about us. It was about the love we had found, the love that had come in its own time, in its own way, and had shown us that it was never too late to start over, to build something new, and to love again. As the months turned into years, I found myself reflecting on the journey Thomas and I had taken together. What started as a quiet, unexpected love had blossomed into something more meaningful than I could have imagined. We had created a life for ourselves that wasn't bound by anyone's expectations but our own. It wasn't always perfect, but it was ours. And that was more than I had ever hoped for. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, I turned to Thomas and said, "You know, I never thought I would feel like this again. I thought I was done. Done with love, with finding someone who truly understood me. But here we are, and it feels like we've just started." Thomas smiled, his hand resting gently on mine. I feel the same way. It's like we've built something out of nothing, something so real that it feels like we've been doing this forever. We talked more about our life, how far we'd come, the small milestones we had celebrated, the things we had learned about each other. We had both been through our share of heartache, but it was in that heartache that we had learned to appreciate what we had now. Love, we realized, didn't have to come in big, dramatic moments. It didn't have to be a whirlwind. It was in the quiet moments of togetherness, sitting together, drinking coffee, holding hands, that love became truly profound. It wasn't long before we decided to host a small celebration to mark our journey. Not a big anniversary party or a grand gathering, but an intimate dinner with friends and family who had been there for us. It was our way of thanking those who had supported us, who had believed in our love even when others doubted it. We invited the people who mattered most to us, the ones who had stood by our side through the years. The evening was simple, but beautiful. We shared stories, laughter, and a delicious meal. And Thomas and I exchanged a few heartfelt words about how grateful we were to have found each other. It wasn't a traditional celebration. It wasn't about showcasing a fairy tale, but about honoring what we had built together. It was a testament to the strength of love and how it can thrive at any stage in life, if you're open to it. As I looked around the room at the faces of the people I loved, I realized how far I had come. The woman who had once felt invisible, the one who had been told that her time for love had passed, was now surrounded by the very people who had witnessed her growth. The love I had found with Thomas wasn't just for us, it had touched those around us, encouraging them to believe that it's never too late to find happiness, to find love, and to begin a new chapter. Looking back on everything, the struggles, the doubts, the fears, I could finally say with certainty that I had lived a life that was full. It wasn't the life I had once imagined, and it wasn't perfect, but it had been mine. And as I sat beside Thomas that night, reflecting on all that had come before and all that was still ahead, I realized that this wasn't the end of my story. It was simply a new beginning. At 78, I had found the love of my life. A love that didn't come with conditions. A love that wasn't based on age or appearances or societal expectations. It was a love built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared desire to create something meaningful together. It had taken me years to realize that love doesn't have a timeline, and that you are never too old to find happiness or to love again. The truth was, I had already lived the best wedding of my life, not because of the ceremony itself, but because of the love I shared with Thomas. It wasn't the flowers, the dress, or the grand speeches. It was the connection we had. And now, in the days that followed, I found joy in the simple moments we shared, the mornings we spent together, the quiet evenings at home, the plans we made for the future. In the end, love wasn't about timing or meeting certain milestones. It was about finding someone who accepts you, who sees you for who you truly are, and who wants to build a life with you. Thomas and I had found that, and for that, I would be forever grateful. I had been told that I was too old to marry again, that I had missed my chance at love, but I had proved them all wrong. Not only had I married again, but I had married the man who would spend the rest of my life with me, the man who made me feel alive, seen, and cherished every single day. Our journey wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about living fully in the present and moving forward with a love that knew no age limits. We had built something beautiful, something real, and we would continue to do so, day by day, side by side. And so this chapter wasn't the final one. It was just the beginning of the next beautiful phase of my life. A life filled with love, laughter, and the certainty that no matter how old we are, there is always room for new beginnings. For me, for Thomas, and for anyone who dares to believe that love at any age is always possible.